This is the United Kingdom, the sixth largest economy in the world, home to one of the largest stock exchanges in the world, and a major exporter of financial services, pharmaceuticals, and aerospace products. The United Kingdom stands today at a pivotal point in its economic journey, from a once dominant role in the days of the Industrial Revolution to its current position in the global economy. The UK's story is one of innovation, resilience, and growth. However, this may not be the case forever. Today, the UK's economy, once the engine of industrial might, is in dire straits. Since early 2022, the economy has grappled with weak growth, a trend that is projected to keep up into 2024. The UK's GDP growth rate makes this clear. From July to September 2023, GDP growth was flatlining at exactly 0%, a total stagnation in economic activity compared to the previous quarter. Meanwhile, inflation, another key challenge for the British economy, stood at a whopping 4.6% in October. Although it had fallen from 6.7% in September, inflation remains high by historical standards, continuing to worsen cost of living and consumer confidence. There are some bright spots. Productivity has improved a bit, with a 0.7 increase in the second quarter of this year. But in reality, this slight uptick is overshadowed by a concerning rise in public debt. Government borrowing in the first half of 2023 soared to £82 billion, £15 billion more than last year, pushing public sector debt to a massive 97.8% of GDP. This all points to an economy in trouble. Stagnant growth, high inflation, rising debt, and many other challenges await the UK's economy. Gone are the days of robust growth and unbreakable optimism. Instead, this economic decline raises several pressing questions. How did one of the world's leading economies find itself in this precarious position? And perhaps, most importantly, can it recover? Or is it too late to save the United Kingdom? The storied economic history of the UK is a tale of growth, transformation, and ultimately success. The 19th century saw the nation leading the charge of the Industrial Revolution, a period of rapid industrialization and economic expansion for the UK. This economy, one many Brits hope to return to, solidified the UK's status as a global power for decades to come. Moving into the 20th century, however, new challenges awaited. The two world wars and the Great Depression severely impacted Britain and its economy, leading to a period of reconstruction and recovery afterwards, as well as the initial expansion of the welfare state. In the latter half of the 20th century, the UK transitioned from its industrial focus to a more service-oriented economy, with finance, healthcare, and education becoming key sectors. The 2000s brought a new set of challenges, including, of course, the decision to leave the European Union. Brexit, a defining moment for the UK, had massive far-reaching economic implications. Pre-Brexit, the country enjoyed the benefits of free movement of goods, services, and people. Post-Brexit, though, led to new trade barriers, uncertainty in investment, and a total revelation of its economic relationships both within Europe and globally. Adding to these challenges was the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought unprecedented disruptions. Lockdown and social distancing measures led to a contraction in economic activity, with sectors like retail and hospitality particularly hard hit. The government's response, including financial support measures, did help mitigate some of the damage, but also contributed to a new problem, like rising public debt. Today, the UK stands at a crossroads. Despite all its past achievements and economic success, it faces the challenges of the present and uncertainties for the future. This period isn't just a hiccup, it's a time of significant uncertainty for a nation historically regarded as an economic powerhouse. How has the UK, within its legacy of economic power, found itself in such a troubling situation? And what does this mean for the future of the United Kingdom? For the most part, the story of the UK's modern economy has been one of steady, consistent growth. From the 1950s all the way through to the early 2000s, the British economy grew an impressive clip with only some small bumps along the way. In recent years, the biggest exceptions to this have been the 2008 financial crisis and COVID-19, but each time the economy recovered swiftly. This is even more revealing when we look at the GDP growth rate. For most of the modern era, the British economy grew somewhere between 2 and 6% each year, with fluctuations of course. easily visible are the minus 4.5% growth in 2009 and the historic 11% dip in 2020. When we look at other economic indicators, we see a similar story of a British economy that, over the last 20 to 30 years, has been quite healthy and performing robustly. Take inflation, for example. Since 1993, consumer prices have been relatively stable, and only twice did inflation ever rise above 3% yearly. That is, until now. The real estate sector is just one more piece of data that tells us something different is happening in the UK economy today. Real estate accounts for 13% of UK economic output, but activity dipped 0.4% in the last quarter. That's alongside the average residential property being down 3.2% in October from the same month in 2022. So, what exactly is going on? Well, before diving into the figures and statistics that explain the UK's economic predicament, there are two elephants in the room that need to be mentioned to understand the British economy in recent years. That's Brexit and COVID-19. The UK's decision to leave the European Union, known as Brexit, was a major shift in its economic landscape. Brexit, a complex process that was finalised in January 2020, ended the UK's membership in the EU, deeply affecting trade, investment and labour. Post-Brexit, the UK experienced plenty of changes in trade. Where the UK had torn down trade barriers, Brexit put them up again. In 2021, trade with the EU fell far below that for non-EU trade in its first time in recent memory. Given the EU has long been the UK's largest trading partner, it's not surprising that Brexit led to disruptions. Foreign direct investment, or FDI, also felt the brunt of Brexit. The uncertainty surrounding the UK's future relationship with the EU made investors cautious, leading to a decline in FDI inflows. This hesitancy was also mirrored in the value of the British pound, which experienced plenty of volatility in the wake of Brexit announcements. Additionally, Brexit had a chilling effect on business investment. The uncertainty and the prospect of new trade barriers led many businesses to hold back on investment decisions, awaiting clearer signals on the future economic landscape. This had a ripple effect, impacting business growth, innovation, and overall economic confidence. Finally, the end of free movement between the UK and EU also affected the availability and mobility of the workforce, particularly in sectors like agriculture, healthcare, and hospitality that had relied heavily on EU workers. Altogether, Brexit stifled trade, foreign investment, and immigration all in one fell swoop. If all that wasn't enough, there was then the COVID-19 pandemic, the unprecedented global health crisis that emerged in early 2020. As the virus rapidly spread, with cases in the millions, the government imposed lockdowns and social distancing measures, leading to a significant contraction in economic activity. As we've seen, this resulted in the UK's GDP plummeting by an historic 10.4% in 2020, with a massive 19.8% fall in GDP between April and June 2020. Household spending also fell by over 20% over this period, the largest quarterly contraction on record, which was driven by falls in spending on restaurants, hotels, transport, and recreation. Unemployment rates too spiked during the pandemic, from 3.8% at the end of 2019 to 5.2% at the end of 2020, prompting the government to implement support measures, like its furlough scheme, to protect over 11 million jobs. Inflation and house prices, on the other hand, skyrocketed and stayed high. Certain sectors, though, notably hospitality and retail, really bore the brunt of the pandemic's impact, especially in cities. Lockdowns and reduced consumer spending led to closures and significant revenue losses, while the pandemic fundamentally altered the operational landscape for many businesses by accelerating shifts towards digital platforms and remote working. Let's now return to the present. Although the UK's economy has largely rebounded from the worst of COVID-19, its outlook still looks negative. The post-pandemic economy rests on shaky ground from economic stagnation, with concerns about a looming recession to high inflation and spiking interest rates, and even a real estate sector seeing prices skyrocket. The lasting effects of both Brexit and the pandemic are there, but Britain's economy uncertainty is more than just that. Altogether, the UK sits at a critical point where its economy could still bounce back to full force, but the question is, will it actually? The clearest sign of health of an economy is its GDP. In 2022, the UK's GDP was £2.5 trillion, and that number has moved little since. In the third quarter of 2023, the UK's GDP remained stagnant, showing no growth from the previous quarter. There was a minor decline in the services sector and slight growth in construction, but overall, production was unchanged. September saw a small increase in GDP, but again saw no change in production. Forecasts for the future look no better at this point. At best, GDP is forecast to grow only 0.5% in 2023. But other predictions suggest a slight contraction. This is expected to be followed by modest growth in 2024, but again, those forecasts vary, from 0.4% to 1.8% growth. Neither number is very encouraging, however. Of course, these forecasts in GDP growth can't be considered in a vacuum. How does the UK's growth stack up against other comparable countries? When we look at the G7, an informal group of the world's leading industrial nations, the UK is clearly lagging. Compared to pre-pandemic levels, the UK's real GDP has only grown 1.8%, besting only Germany's slow-to-recover economy, while falling far behind the likes of the US, Canada, and the rest of the Eurozone as a whole. When it comes to GDP, the picture is one of stagnation and potential recession, but it's worth noting that GDP can be analysed in terms of the output produced by different industries, or in terms of spending by households, business, and government, which lets economists see which parts of the economy are suffering or growing. For the UK, it's obvious that the services economy has been behind a large part of the lag. Services are the largest part of the economy, making up about 82% of output in 2021, but the service sector output only grew by 0.2% in September 2023. Meanwhile, expenditure, another key part of GDP, hasn't been much better. Household consumption is the largest element of expenditure across the economy, accounting for 60% of it. So, the fact that from July to September of 2023, household consumption fell by 0.4% compared with the previous quarter does not provide much confidence. Productivity is another key determinant of living standards. In 2023, the UK's labour productivity saw a modest rise and was 2.1% higher than pre-pandemic levels in Q4 2019. Historically, growing at about 2% annually, UK productivity growth has slowed. Ever since the 2008-2009 recession, this trend of gradual slowdown in productivity has persisted. Internationally, the UK ranked 4th in the G7 for GDP per hour worked in 2022, approximately 17% below the US, another sign of an economy losing steam. What about inflation? Since COVID-19, just about every industrialized economy has suffered from elevated inflation, but the UK in particular was hit hard. In fact, October of 2022 recorded a CPI of 11.1%, the UK's highest since 1997. Still, while 2023 got off to a slow start as a result, the situation does seem to be improving. A decrease of 4.6% in October 2023 from 6.7% in September is an encouraging sign and was likely driven by reduced gas and electricity prices and lower costs in food. When we compare the UK's battle with inflation to that of their neighbours in the Eurozone, it does look like they have been slower to recover, however. Inflation in the Eurozone was 2.9% in October, compared to 4.6% of the UK. Across the Atlantic, the United States saw its own inflation rate drop to a comparable 3.3%. Overall, the picture is improving, but it's a slower recovery for the UK than its peers have managed. This brings to mind an important question on the minds of many British citizens, which is whether or not earnings have kept up. It's not quite clear, actually. British workers recently had their biggest yearly rise in pay since 1997, as weekly earnings for full-time employees rose by 6.2%. from April 2022 to 2023. Even so, however, workers were out of pocket because of the even bigger jump in inflation over the last 12 months. Altogether, median weekly earnings fell by 1.5% on the year when adjusted for inflation. On the subject of the workforce, the unemployment rate shows mixed signals. In September 2023, there were 1.45 million unemployed in the UK, an increase of 224,000 from the previous year. The overall unemployment rate was holding steady at 4.2%, a slight increase from 3.6% a year earlier. For young people aged 16 to 24, though, unemployment rose significantly from the previous year, climbing to 12.6% from 9.8%. However, analysts warn that these figures may be deeply flawed, and so they may not be the best indicator of the UK's economic trajectory. Compare these statistics to that of other advanced economies, and again, the output is a bit of a mixed bag. The UK's unemployment rate remained higher than that of the US or Germany, but in a positive signal. It came in lower than that of France, Spain, or Greece, and was lower than that of the Eurozone as a whole, which averaged 6.5%. Another crucial part of the economy is its debt. In 2023, the UK's government borrowing reached a whopping £82 billion, £15 billion more than the same period last year. That means that as of September 2023, government debt stood at 97.8% of GDP. Excluding the Bank of England's debt, this figure reduces to 89.3% of GDP, but still represents a precariously high amount. Is this a problem? Naturally, it depends on who you ask, but most analysts agree that this is a worrying sign. As part of its debt responsibilities, the UK will spend $110 billion on debt interest in 2023 at 10.4% of government revenue. That would be the highest level of any high-income country. Looking outside of the UK's borders, its trade balance does little to help the situation. In 2022, the UK was importing more than exporting, leading to a trade deficit of £78 billion, or 3.1% of GDP. Exports totaled $834 billion, while imports were higher at $902 billion. That widened to $25.3 billion in Q2 of 2023, amounting to 3.7% of GDP. Notably, the UK had a trade deficit of $81 billion with the EU, but a surplus of $13 billion with non-EU countries. This is likely a remnant of Brexit and its economic impact. How are consumers responding to all this? Consumer confidence is a key indicator of economic sentiment, reflecting the public's outlook on the economy and their own financial situation. So, it's concerning that it fell sharply from September to October, a drop of 9 points. It did rise slightly the next month, but altogether, consumer confidence remains a long way off pre-COVID levels. The key signal, though, as to whether consumers are really feeling better and more positive about the UK's economy would be how they're spending. To get a good idea of consumer spending, we can look at retail sales in the UK, and what we find is that sales volume is continuing to fall, albeit slower in recent months. In October, the overall volume of retail sales declined by 0.3%, following a 1.1% drop from August to September. Year on year, the volume of sales fell by 1.8%, compared to pre-pandemic levels in February 2020. Sales volume in October of 2023 was still 3.1% lower. Retailers attribute these trends to consumers grappling with increased living costs and paint a picture of a population still trying to make ends meet. The UK's housing market tells a different, but altogether similar story of the economy at large. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, UK house prices have been on a significant upturn. However, today, the opposite is true. Now, prices are falling more than they have in over a decade. Meanwhile, a sharp increase in mortgage costs is weighing on buyers, and mortgage approvals dropped sharply this year, down 32% from the previous year and 5% from August. While there are signs that the market may be steadying, some are still calling it a full-blown housing crisis. Even still, there could be another bubble in the UK economy as well, just waiting to pop. The ratio of UK household debt to disposable income, often seen as an accurate measure of financial health, has slowly been decreasing, but still looks to be a ticking time bomb. As of 2023, the ratio stood at 126.8%, which still represents a potential risk, and a countdown to a household debt disaster could be warranted, considering how few of the UK citizens are able to pay back the collective £22 billion they owe. When we combine all of the pieces of the puzzle together, a clear picture of the UK economy emerges, one at a pivotal moment where economic stagnation, uncertainties in trade and investment post-Brexit, all alongside the lingering effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, paint a complex scenario. The British economy is certainly in rough shape, and recession looms large, but is there still a chance to right this ship? At this point, the UK's long-term prosperity hinges all on this moment, and success will be dictated by whether or not strategic reforms and effective policy can be implemented. So, can the UK economy be saved? Or is it too late? There's still hope, but like everything else in the field of economics, we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks for watching.